Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. What do you do when your entire religious worldview crumbles? Our guest today is a survivor of Christian fundamentalism, now a counselor to others who need help dealing with religious trauma.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
What is religious trauma? Our guest today will tell us. Janice Selbie is a registered professional counselor in British Columbia and a religious trauma coach. She's the founder of Divorcing Religion. She's the host of the Divorcing Religion podcast, founder of the Conference on Religious Trauma, and the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Conference.
Janice Selbie's new book, Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook, was just released a few months ago. It tells her personal story of, divorcing religion. Welcome to Freethought Matters, Janice.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And we're glad to welcome you from British Columbia.
Yep, joining you from Kelowna, the Okanagan Valley.
And we do not want you to become our 51st state. We're all for autonomy for Canada. We need you.
Yes, consent is a thing.
Right.
So Janice, I enjoyed your book and I related because, I was also raised fundamentalist. You grew up fundamentalist like I did. What were you indoctrinated to believe, and what kind of experiences did you have? Were they Pentecostal, charismatic? What was it?
Yes, I was raised in a Pentecostal home. So my parents believed that the Bible was the true, inerrant, literal Word of God, perfect in every way, and that it relayed actual events that had taken place. And so my parents believed that, my church believed that, the Christian friends that I had believed that. So I didn't really have much cause to doubt it. And so, yes, when I was sick, there would be laying on of hands. My parents would anoint me with oil. They were devout. They loved me deeply and wanted me to be healthy. And so in addition to taking me to see a doctor, they would also do these extra pieces that they felt were biblical. And speaking in tongues was a very normal situation also in my family and in my church. Right. Church was fun.
And faith healing.
When I was Pentecostal.
And I imagine it was noisy.
It was noisy. Sometimes there was dancing. The music was typically really great, really got you moving. So I enjoyed it. That was when I was Pentecostal. Later on in my life, as I became increasingly fundamentalist, I started hanging out with the Haldeman Mennonites. That wasn't quite as much fun. There were no musical instruments there. Men sat on one side, women on the other. Women wore head coverings. That was quite serious once I was getting in with those folks.
So your book talks about the cult of purity culture. What is that? And what were your experiences? And is it true that you actually needed your pastor's consent to date?
I think it depends on exactly kind of which denomination or which flavor of fundamentalist Christianity that people are in. So my pastor did actually introduce me and set me up with my first husband. He he thought we would be a good match. We certainly both believed in Jesus, but that was pretty much where our similarities ended. The idea of purity culture has to do with the whole patriarchal concept of women not being in charge or control of their own bodies, the idea that men and boys are in danger because their thoughts might be lustful, but women and girls are actually dangerous because they can cause men to do immoral things, men wanting to have sex with them. So it's really a burden. It's a burden for those growing up female. It's a burden for those growing up male, because we're taught that we're sinful and our bodies are not our own. And so we're not to have any sex or any intimate contact, even kissing, really, until marriage. And marriage, of course, being between a man and a woman. So it really doesn't take into account any of the queer community. It's just a lot of shame-based misinformation and teaching. That's purity culture.
It sounds like it's straight out of the Bible in terms of blaming women for evil and lust and so on. Eve,
boy,
the sinful
you got
Eve.
it. Yes, yes, that's exactly right.
So this is curious. So your pastor set you up with your first husband. Would you have chosen each other? I mean, did you normally fall in love and choose each other, or was this sort of a mechanical thing that happened?
I wouldn't say that we typically were the type of people who probably would have been attracted to each other.
Wow.
And certainly, so we did marry, and we stayed married for almost 2 decades. But, eventually, when my religious ideas were falling apart, my marriage was also falling apart. And so we came to the end of that road, and it was difficult because we did care about each other, but the main tie that had bound us together was our religious beliefs, and mine had disappeared. They had shockingly dissolved. No one expected that. I didn't expect to lose my faith, and I just couldn't make things work and stick together anymore after that. Thankfully, we've been able to retain a friendship. We've become quite good friends since our divorce, actually.
Well, you have a history together.
That's good. Yeah. But before we talk about your loss of faith,
yeah.
I think, Dan, you were going to ask about...
Well, you got married and you went to a fundamentalist Bible college. And at a fundamentalist college, are women and men treated the same? How were you treated as a female student there?
Right. So we went for my husband. I wasn't a student, so I could go to chapel and I could sit in on some of the classes, but I wasn't getting credit for them. And so the college he attended was called Prairie Bible Institute or Prairie Bible College. And back in the day, just a couple of decades earlier, they actually had the sidewalks at the school divided between pink and blue. It was very, very fundamentalist. I know. By the time we got there, it had loosened up quite a bit, but it was still, pretty conservative, I would say. And it was while we were there that I started becoming even more fundamentalist as I began homeschooling our children and really falling in with the religious homeschool crowd, which is by and large a pretty conservative bunch. And then when I saw that there were more rules in the Bible for me to obey, I thought, well, I should be obeying them. If I'm really a Christian, I really better live it out as best I can. So that's how I got down that rabbit hole.
May I ask, what was your view of atheists during this time?
Oh my gosh, I sure prayed for them. I prayed for them and I prayed against them.
And we forgive you, as Daniel Dennett would say.
Thank you. Yeah. I just thought they were misled. I thought Satan had, blinded them. And one of the main reason probably that I was homeschooling was to protect my daughters. I didn't want the devil to get them. And I just took it all very seriously. It felt real. And of course, I was operating a lot on feelings there rather than actual fact. I was completely indoctrinated.
You describe your husband as somewhat, at least emotionally abusive and distant. And what changed after you learned that he was on the autism spectrum? Did that change anything in your opinion?
Yeah, I definitely felt that he was at times neglectful emotionally, and I didn't understand him. I could see that we weren't understanding each other. And then when I came to learn about Asperger's syndrome, or being on the spectrum, it did actually help me, because then I felt like, oh, he's not purposely trying to hurt me. We are having conversations, and he actually just wasn't really picking up on all the emotional undercurrents necessarily in the conversation, and that opened some compassion for me, actually. So that was really good and helpful.
Did you marry again after that? Or I
Yes,
understand that you became a pastor's
Well,
wife.
he was a pastor.
Oh,
that's
I
right.
see.
That's right. He became a pastor after we spent our time at the Prairie Bible College. He became a pastor, much against my wishes. I thought he would be really well suited to being a professor, because he's quite cerebral and knew an awful lot about the Bible and Scripture and history. But I saw that he would not be a great fit for pastoring, because you have to at least be a shepherd, and that just wasn't in his makeup. So
So
that
what was
was
that
pretty much a
pastor?
fiasco.
You have a cute chapter titled Pastor Disaster.
It really was. And it was, he tried so hard, and I tried so hard. And we moved to a tiny, tiny town, less than 1,000 people, and took over the Pentecostal church, which was dying by then. There were just, a few kind of senior couples left in the church. Just basically, they wanted to be buried. But he got there with the idea that we have to change, we have to revive this church. So out went all the hymns. I remember him literally wheeling in huge speaker stacks for his electric guitar into the church. And I was thinking, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. And let me tell you, it didn't go over well.
So you had children. Did you receive any advice from Christian parenting experts about how to raise your kids?
Yes, sadly, a lot of Dr. Dobson, a little bit, unfortunately, of the Pearls as well. Just the idea that children need to be disciplined from the time they're very little. The idea of you've got to almost break their spirit. And so I'm thankful I saw that there were flaws in a lot of that thinking, and I tended more just towards James Dobson, but I sure have regrets and things that I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd just been able to enjoy my children's curiosity with them. They're so delightful. Kids are so earnest, and they have such questions about the world, but in Christianity, curiosity has to be stamped out in favor of obedience. And that's how it was in our house.
So you call your loss of faith testimony an extimony. What do you mean by that?
I hadn't heard that word before.
And you also use the word acorn, adult child of religious nuts. So tell us more about these terms you've come up with.
Sure. Pardon me. Yeah. So the idea of an extimony, to me, it's when I share my experiences of leaving religion. It's kind of the reverse of a testimony. A religious testimony would be, how Jesus helped me or why I came to Christianity. My extimony is all about getting out and leaving. And the acorns, thank you so much for remembering that. I recognize that adult children of alcoholics, ACOA, they have a laundry list of symptoms. And so do acorns, adult children of religious nuts. We share a lot of the same laundry list, largely related to codependency and people, our parents, potentially almost being addicted to religion. So there's a lot of crossover there with adult children of alcoholics, and that's where acorns came in.
So you don't believe anymore. Why did you leave the faith?
Our youngest daughter, unfortunately, received a lifelong, life-threatening diagnosis. So it moved us into a constant state of yellow and orange alert for her safety. And she was only about 10 at the time. And this was after I had spent so many decades trying to live out the Bible and be the best Christian I could be. Comforting people, opening our home, being charitable, merciful. And then I saw my daughter was stricken with this, and I just figured something is wrong here. I've bet on the wrong horse. God might be out there, but he's not in Christianity. And I gave myself permission to start exploring. And then eventually determined God wasn't anywhere. I didn't throw the baby out with the bath water. I drained the tub and found there was no baby in there. And so I
like
did
Dan.
become an atheist. Exactly, just like Dan. Yes.
In terms of, we're talking about religious trauma. Briefly, before we go for the break, what was your religious trauma?
Oh, definitely the purity culture factored in. Also, there was a lot of fear. There was confusion. I was very concerned about hell. Would my children go to hell because I stopped believing? I was lacking trust in myself. If I had believed something for so many years and it turned out to be incorrect, what else was I believing that could be wrong? Were people holding out on me? Did people have the truth somewhere and I just didn't know it? So those were some of the issues that were traumatizing for me.
We are talking with religious trauma counselor Janice Selbie, who was raised in a very conservative patriarchal religion. And when we come back from the break, we want to ask you, Janice, more about the syndrome of religious trauma, what a trauma coach does, and how folks can heal from religious trauma.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name is Katie, and I am an out-of-the-closet atheist. I've never really believed in a God. Of course, there are always those moments where you wish an omnipotent being would swoop down and offer divine intervention, but ultimately, you can't reconcile that with reality. I never really liked attending church either. When I was in grade school, I had to go 5 days a week and once on the weekends, and then in high school I had to go, and I went to Catholic school the entire time. One Ash Wednesday after I got my license, I wasn't able to go to church with my family. So I told my mom I would go, but instead I drove to a park, lit the end of a stick on fire, and smudged the ashes on my forehead to prove that I had gone. Ultimately, the church's position on same-sex marriage, women's rights, and their handling of certain scandals were the final nails in the cross, so to speak. As a feminist and a humanitarian, I find it necessary to come out of the closet and declare my atheism.
Welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Janice Selbie, a religious trauma coach and author of the new book, Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook.
So you, Janice, finally left religion. And why is it so hard for people to leave religion?
I think it has a lot to do with our identity being enmeshed with our ideology. And so if we see a loose thread, we don't want to tug on that thread because we're scared everything might unravel. That's surely what happened for me. And it's a terrifying time then because you're in a free fall. Everything dissolves about how you understood the world, and you often lose your community, your identity, your worldview. So it's not for the faint of heart. People need support when they're doing this.
Or they need to be very brave, as Dan was, apparently as you were.
It was scary, you know, especially hell and judgment. And not only that, but the approval of your friends and relatives and your family, all of that pulls into it, you know.
Yeah, I searched for years. I would sit in front of the computer and I didn't even know what words to type in. I didn't know anyone else who had been as devout and believed wholeheartedly, and who had left and gone on to live a happy, rewarding life until I discovered Dr. Marlene Winnell and her book, Leaving the Fold, and her group, Journey Free. So Marlene was really instrumental in my healing.
And this must be very common because, Dan, when we first met in person on the Oprah Winfrey Show, you told us that my mother and I were the first atheists you had actually met.
And knowingly met.
Yeah,
and I think my story is in that book, is too. Marlene's book, briefly, is in there. You and Marlene are using the phrase religious trauma syndrome. Is that a thing?
Yes. So religious trauma syndrome just refers to a collection of symptoms that people commonly experience when they have left a high demand, rigid, authoritarian religious group. And often that means our family. Lots of times we're indoctrinated in childhood. So it's not just our community, but it's our family as well. So it refers to some of the symptoms that we can have when we're leaving those groups. We suffer losses as a result of being in the group because we're so restricted. And then we suffer losses when we leave on top. And it can be really hard to find our feet again. And finding community is a very important aspect of the healing.
And you write that for some people it can be what you call a psychological tsunami, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's how it felt for me, because it wasn't just my beliefs; it was also my community, and my entire identity were just wiped away. It felt like in an instant, and I had to start over. It was scary, and it was really sad. And there was existential crisis that also came in when I started to. I was happy to think, well, oh, I guess there's no hell. And then I thought, oh, okay, then maybe there's no heaven. And that part was a little more difficult to accept.
Did you have any friends or any acquaintances that you could talk with, could help you at that early time?
I really didn't. I didn't feel I could tell my husband or talk about what was going on with him, because our marriage was struggling at that time. My Christian friends, I felt, just would tell me to pray more or fast and pray, or, those sorts of things that I was already doing. My parents were believers. So really, until I connected with Marlene, I hadn't had a chance to talk with other people. And so now I run support groups, so that people can come in and experience some of the healing that I did by connecting with others who have divorced religion, and they're looking to rebuild a secular life.
And you are now what do you call it, religious trauma coach? Right.
Religious trauma recovery coach. And in Canada, I'm also a registered professional counselor. So I have clients around the world as a coach. I work with people who've come from every religious background, from Amish to Scientology, because even though our beliefs were different, a lot of our losses are quite similar. It's about grief. It's grief and loss recovery, really.
And what are some of the other issues that clients talk about with you?
Well, for some folks, if they got married when they were religious and now they don't believe, but they still have a believing spouse, that can be extremely hard to deal with, especially if there are children. And of course, then we have to shift our focus from shared beliefs to shared values and see if we can focus enough on that to keep the marriage together. But, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes marriages end. It's just a transition. It's not a failure. So dealing also with still believing family members, grandparents, relatives, friends, bosses, that can also be really difficult. So that's another thing we work on, is communication and boundaries.
Yeah, like what do you do at Thanksgiving dinner when they want to pray and you don't? All that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. It all factors in. I was at the hairdresser the other day, and as soon as I sat in the chair with my wet hair, she started telling me about she's going on a missions trip. She's all excited about it, and I was horrified. But I had to decide, well, do I make her mad and she cuts off all my hair, or do I just try and change the subject? So
she's got some sharp instruments there.
That's right. Yeah, so learning to deal with people who still believe, especially in the current political climate, is challenging.
And then what about reclaiming healthy sexuality after all of this toxic purity culture stuff?
Yes, thank you so much. That is something that clients routinely bring to me. I mean, some of them are in their 50s, 60s, 70s and have actually never experienced the pleasure of sex because they were waiting for a godly person, or they were in the church and they didn't think they could have sex. So now they need to find out how to date other people, how to approach other people. They're even trying to figure out, am I straight? Am I queer? There's lots of exploration to do. And that's why I started Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture. That's the conference coming up in Seattle in May. And people can go to shamelesssexuality.org to find out more about that. And Daryl Ray is going to be one of our speakers. I think you both know Daryl, of Recovering from Religion.
And in your book, you talk about giving your clients exercises that you call values clarification. And how do you do that, and what is the goal?
Oh, sure. I think that's a very important aspect of healing from religious trauma syndrome. We have to figure out what values were we holding just because our parents and our pastors told us that we had to have those values, versus what are our values now. So previously, submission and obedience would have been right at the top of my important values. They don't even make it on my list now. Autonomy, critical thinking, freedom, those are my values at this point. So there are usually online tests and questions people can do to take a look at their values. And that can also be something helpful to do with a spouse to see if your values are in alignment, or if there are some things you could be working on together.
And because I had come from a similar experience as you invited me to be a part of, I think it was your second conference on religious trauma, CORT, Conference on Religious Trauma. We can call it a Supreme Court, can't we? So, so you hold these conferences. Tell us more about these conferences and what happens.
Sure. The Conference on Religious Trauma, CORT, the first one was in 2021. I held it online. I've held it online for several years. And then a couple years ago, I also decided we needed Shameless Sexuality Conference. That was also online. And I have speakers from all over North America, and sometimes from other continents as well, who specialize in religious trauma, who understand it, or authors and social workers, people sharing their resources, their information. And it's the same with Shameless Sexuality as well, people who understand about human sexuality and some of the healing that we need to go through when we're recovering from religion.
So in boiled down advice, one sentence as we conclude, what help can you give someone struggling with religious trauma? What should they do?
Well, don't panic. You're not alone. Reach out to me for a 20-minute consultation. And I have a YouTube channel full of lots of helpful resources as well, for free, for anyone who's looking for help recovering from religious trauma.
Well, thank you so much, Janice, for joining us today.
What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.